Hello, my wonderful psychology students. Welcome to a session on the cognitive approach. Remember, this is from paper 2 in the approaches section. Let's have a quick look at the specification link. In this module, we're going to be looking at the internal mental processes, the role of the schema, theoretical and computer models to explain mental processes, and the emergence of cognitive neuroscience. And yes, don't forget, there's always going to be AO3 evaluation. But let's start with the assumptions. It's always a good place to start. Key assumptions. Now, with the cognitive approach, it's all about the mental processes. And really, a simple way to think about mental processes is our thought processes, the way we think. It's the way we store the information, manipulate it, perceive it, and interpret the information that we have within our thought processes. Now, there are many different types of mental processes. Here are just 3 of them: thinking, perception, memory. These are explored differently by different types of cognitive psychologists, and these will help us understand our mental processes. When we do memory, which is in paper 1, we will understand these cognitive processes further. Now, the thing about these internal mental processes, they are private and we cannot observe them. So that means when we do research in this area, we must study them indirectly and look at the consequences of these studies and actually make assumptions based on them. So these assumptions will then allow us to understand why a person is behaving that way. So it's about finding ways to measure these internal mental processes that allows us to make these assumptions. And therefore, this research allows the psychologist to make inferences. Inferences are conclusions based on the evidence produced. So again, it's about using the scientific method in order to investigate. And that the most dominant type of research method within this approach is the laboratory experiment, because the laboratory experiments will allow us to get the objective data that we need so that these inferences can be made. Remember, inferences means that we can make conclusion based on the evidence produced through the research. So really, when we look at the cognitive approach, it's about understanding the way we think and how the way we think influences our behavior, because that's what the cognitive approach is saying. The cognitive approach says, yes, there may be a stimulus and there will be a response, but it's about the mental process in the middle and our beliefs about that stimulus, which will cause us then to choose a way to respond. So it is different here from the behaviorist approach. Remember, we've got a lot of differences here, and I'm sure you can match them up. But one of them is stimulus response. Well, the cognitive approach says, yes, there is a stimulus and there will be a response, but that response is dependent on the thought process of the stimulus. It's how we think about that event. So I'll give you an example. We're in class. I bring in a whole collection of spiders. Now, some students will be shouting out, "Get them things away from me," and jumping on the desk, go, "Ah!" Where other ones will be, "Wow, look at that. Let me hold it. Let me see what it does." Same stimulus, different reactions. But according to the cognitive approach, it's the way the person thinks, it's their beliefs about that stimulus which causes their response. So that's what the cognitive approach stands for. It's behavior is determined through our mental processes. Now, I just want to throw in a little bit of AO3 here. I like to do this. Here in this one, remember we're developing our peels. We're not doing full peels yet, but in this one, We're doing a point, explain, evaluate, link. Now remember, your point needs to be clear and precise. So the cognitive approach uses a very scientific method of investigation in order to carry out its research. That's what we've just been talking about in the assumption. So yes, we've got a nice strength there. Clear, precise point. Now explain. Explain means, what does the point actually mean? These are mainly laboratory experiments that allow for high levels of control and replicability, so the results are reliable. So yes, it's explaining what we mean by the scientific method in order to carry out the research. Now, we're bringing in a little evaluate. Now, evaluate can be in further support of the point, or it can challenge the point. In this case, we're going to challenge the point a little bit. And remember, use those connector words like however, in contrast. However, they lack ecological validity because of the artificial environment, so it might not reflect the way people process information in their everyday life. Ecological validity. Ecological, if you're not sure what this means, ecological validity, it means environment. So what this little challenging point saying, hold on, if we're doing these experiments about people's thought processes in a laboratory experiment, which we know it is an artificial environment, how can we generalize it to the real world? So we're highlighting a little problem with this. So we've got our point, we've got our explain, our point is a strength, but we're also bringing in a little bit of a weakness of the scientific method that the cognitive approach likes to use. So we're going to finish it up with an L. Remember, link. Each of them has to link to one another. The point links to the cognitive approach, but also the linking sentence is like a mini conclusion to tie it all together. So using this method to investigation allows for inferences to be made based on objective data generated. So it makes a nice little conclusion. It's not repeating the point again. It's making a nice little conclusion why the point is a good thing, and it ties it all together. So let's move on. Now, we're going to start looking at our theoretical and computer models. Now, the thing about the cognitive approach, like we said in the assumptions, our cognition is studied indirectly. So that means we can't see our thoughts. Doesn't matter how hard I try, I cannot see my thoughts. So one way to explain this abstract concept of our thinking is to create a model. So we've got theoretical and computer models. Now, models allow us to visualize. You know, if you've got an architect that's creating this magnificent building, before it even gets built, they create a model so that people can see what it's going to look like. And that's what these are like. These are models that allow people to physically see this mental process, this cognitive mediating processes. So let's move on. Now, the computer model. When the computer started coming in the 1950s and 60s, cognitive psychologists saw a clear link. And they can use the computer model as an analogy that actually kind of represents the way we think. So the computer model represents the functioning of the mind, as it is suggested that there are similarities in the way information is processed. For example, the brain would equal your central processor, your hard drive. Coding, right? The format in which we use the information, right? So when you've typed, actually your computer could be putting into its own computer language in order to process. So, and that's what we do. Our thought processes code that information. Storage. You know, how many RAM have you got? How many gigabytes have you got? The same way with storage in the brain. Based on this computer analogy, cognitive psychology is interested in how the brain inputs, stores, and retrieves information, thereby uses computer models to understand the process. So we've got a great analogy. And yes, it is one way that we can actually create a model to understand the cognitive process. Another type of modeling that we use is known as theoretical models. Now, these theoretical models allow us to understand the concepts that are difficult to observe and allows us to make certain inferences regarding the flow of the cognitive system. Remember, inferences, conclusions based on, in this case, the theoretical model. So here, we need some form of visual representation to understand a process. And then once we have this visual representation, it allows for better understanding. For example, when we do memory, we're going to be looking at the multi-store model of memory. Now that is a theoretical model because it explains the whole process from us getting the information to us storing it in the long-term memory. So by creating this model, and this is what it looks like, it actually allows us to see the process in which information is processed, dealt with, and stored. I'm not going to go through all this right now. When we do the cognitive approach, you'll see this. But we've got here 3 memory stores. All the information in our environment goes into the sensory store. If we pay attention, it can go into the short-term memory. And if we keep rehearsing that information, it will stay in the short-term memory. And for it to be transferred into the long-term memory, we need to recode it so it can be stored. So that's just, and this is a theoretical model. By looking at the diagram, it allows us to see this process that we physically can't see. Now, the next element of the cognitive and key element that we look at that allows us to understand these processes, mental processes, is our schemas. Now, a schema is a packet of information. I actually like to look at it as the idea, you get a filing cabinet, and inside those filing cabinets, you've got all these little files. And that's kind of like our schemas. It's like this packets of information, or all these files within a filing cabinet. The correct term, of course, is known as the cognitive framework. Now, this cognitive framework, or the schemas, they help us organize and interpret information. They are based on our previous experiences. So everything that we've experienced and learned about a certain stimulus will have a schema created for it. For example, how to behave at school. When you had never been to school before, as soon as you went to school, or mum starts saying, "Oh, you're going to school, let's get your uniform," your brain would open up a new folder, put on their school, and everything related to school would be placed in there. So your schemas themselves would develop and evolve with experience. I've got an example here. When you were 5 years old, your schema about a dog is very different to the schema what it is now, right? Even when you're younger than 5 years old, mum, dad, granny takes you to the park and they go, "Oh, look, a doggy." So what does your mental processes do? Oh, let's get another file here, doggy. Look at the doggy, it barks. Barks goes in your schema. Ooh, it's got fur, it's got 2 ears, 4 legs. Look at its long waggy tail. Ooh, the dog barks. Ooh, the dog growls. Ooh, dog's scary. So everything you experience with that dog or dogs throughout your life goes into your schema. And maybe somebody had a bad experience with a dog. So in their schema, it will say dogs, aggressive, scary. Where in other people's schema, dogs, lick, play, friendly. So it's our experiences that build up these schemas. And I bet you now, if I asked you for the next 2 minutes, tell me stuff about dogs, you'll tell me about what they're like, the differences they are, the different breeds that they have, and how the different breeds may be different. And this is all based on your experience with dogs. And these are our schemas. Schemas are really important because they allow us to understand what's happening and make sense of what's happening around us, but also allow us to take shortcuts in interpreting the vast amount of information that is available in our environment. But it is also important that you understand that in these schemas, there's going to be correct information, stereotypical information, wrong information, information based on our own personal experience. So it's not just the pure facts that's in there. That's why you might find somebody will act rather bizarrely, and you might think, why did I do that? Because it's based on the information that's in your schema. These mental frameworks also cause us to exclude important information, to focus on only things that confirm our pre-existing beliefs and ideas. And this can cause for misinterpretation. This can cause us to have maladaptive behavior. So here we can see our schemas play a very important role because they build up this knowledge of information so that we can process what's happening around us. Oh, don't you just love these AO3s? I do. Here's another one. Now, here, remember, I'm going on our colors. We've got a point, explain, elaborate, and an evaluate. I mean, not an evaluate, a linking concluding sentence. Remember the point, clear and precise. The concept of schemas has practical application. Nice, precise. Now, explain. Explain what the point means. It can explain why two witnesses to the same event might report it in different ways. Because remember, we're explaining why it's got practical eyewitnesses. We need those. We have plenty of eyewitnesses when something criminal or antisocial has happened. Our explain it clearly explains a practical application. Now remember, elaborate. Elaborate means give additional information. As they have different schemas, they might select different aspects of the same situation for attention, and their interpretation might be different. This might affect the eyewitness testimony. So again, they may have seen the exact same thing, but dependent on their schema will depend on how they're going to interpret. And that's why they can have two completely different interpretations. Let's have our linking sentence right at the end. This shows that personal schemas can impact on a person's recall and interpretation of events. So here we can clearly see that, yes, a good thing about schemas allows us to actually have practical implication so that we understand that people may interpret things differently because of their schemas. So this is really insightful information that we have here. Now, cognitive neuroscience is quite a new area developing. Now, if I ask you to draw your mind, and I've asked students before to draw, they kind of draw the brain because that's what you think it is. Well, yes, it's generated from the brain, so it makes perfect sense for cognitive neuroscience. So this means it's cognitive psychologists working with neuroscientists. Now, please, neuro is a nice fancy word for brain. So neuroscientists, brain scientists. Now, it's all about understanding what part of the brain is functioning when doing perhaps a cognitive activity. And this is where the advances in medicine and technology has really helped, and the way that neuroscientists study the brain. They use things like PET scans and fMRI scans, because when perhaps a person is doing a language task, it might show up in the left hemisphere in the Brock or Wernicke area, depending on the type of language task. So we can actually see if that part of the brain is damaged, how it then can affect our language. Or if it was the Wernicke area, which deals with the comprehension of language, how that can then affect our ability to understand language. So cognitive neuroscience is quite a new area of development within cognitive psychology. So what I'd like you to do is get your core textbook, have a read round. What else can you add to understanding about this new emerging area within cognitive psychology? What is cognitive neuroscience? We know cognitive psychologists work with neuroscientists. It's about using scanning techniques. Your job, and you can pause the video here, is for you to investigate how the use of this medical technology has allowed for us to develop a deeper understanding of human cognitions. So do a wee bit of reading in your core text and let's add to your notes. Now, I want to move on to another bit of AO3 here, but you're going to do some of the legwork. Now, we've already looked at the concept when we did psychology as a science, right, and the scientific method. We looked at determinism. Now, we know what determinism means. Determinism means that all behavior has a specific cause, be it internal or external. Always remember when you get a large word, determinism, determine. So if something is determined by something, that means something has a specific cause. Now, we've got two classifications of determinism, hard determinism and soft determinism. So let's understand these a little bit further. And remember, you can add these two terms to your research method glossary. Now, hard determinism states that behavior is always caused by either an internal or external factor. Internal, to do with our biology, external, to do with the environment, and states that free will plays no role in a person's behavior. So really, hard determinism says it's either stimulus in the environment or it's an internal factor that's got to do with our biological or physiological makeup. A person has no choice in it. A person's ability to choose has no influence. It's either a biological factor, internal, or an environmental factor, external, that is the cause. Now, the next type of determinism is called soft determinism. Now, soft determinism means that all behavior has a set cause, just kind of like hard, either internal or external. And that's where it's similar to hard determinism. All behavior has a specific cause, be it internal or external. But there is a but on this one. But it can also be influenced by conscious choice. So this means there is an element of free will. For example, you've got a stonker of a headache, so an internal. According to hard determinism, you're going to be in a bad mood because of your headache, nothing else. That is the cause of your mood. That is the cause of your behavior, that stonker of a headache. However, soft determinism says, yes, your behavior is going to be influenced by that stonker of a headache. However, you might not choose to be moody. You might choose to be pleasant rather than somebody says, hi, how are you today? And you think, oh, just leave me alone. I've got such a bad headache. You might go, yeah, I know I've got a headache, but I'm fine, thank you, and you're pleasant back. So soft determinism says, yes, there is a cause where you might be quieter, but you might choose how to respond. So soft determinism says our behavior has a specific cause, but there is an element of free will, conscious choice on whether we're going to respond to that internal or external factor in that specific way. So what I'd like you to do now is I would like you now, I've done 2 peels for you and we've done plenty of other peels in the other approaches. So this is a skill you're developing. Go to your core textbook, read the nice little paragraph on soft determinism. We've got our point. the cognitive approach can be considered to be classified as being soft deterministic. A little bit worded, but you can make it a bit more precise. Explain what that means, but make sure you're linking it to the cognitive approach. Elaborate on it further. That means give a little bit more information about it, and then give a linking sentence that makes a mini conclusion. So your task is to peel. Then I want you to choose one more AO3 that we haven't done. We've already done 2, and I'd like you to peel. Remember, point must be precise and specific to the topic. Explain, what does the point mean? Really important that you're showing interpretation. Elaborate, you're developing it further. So a bit more interpretation and linking to analysis. So develop the point further by giving additional information. And in our linking sentence, right at the end, after that we've made sure that all the aspects of the P link to one another, we finish off with that little mini conclusion, that little mini conclusion sentence that ties it all together. But remember, it's not repeating the point. Right, so cognitive approach, it's all got to do with the way you think. Well, my lovelies, thank you for taking the time to work through this. Remember, let's develop those notes, and if you've got any questions, just let me know. Take care.